So, we've established two things. First, the traditional options for how to live are inadequate. The aesthetic life leaves you empty, and the ethical life leaves you stale. Second, the way forward requires a leap of faith, committing to something that you cannot rationally prove, choosing yourself into existence through actions that go beyond what we can reason. And now, we need to talk about what this actually means for how you live. Because once you understand that you have to make genuine choices without certainty, everything changes. So let's start with the dread. Kierkegaard talks about dread constantly. It's not the same thing as fear, though. Fear is when you're actually afraid of something specific, like a wild animal, a dangerous person, or a concrete threat. Dread is a little different. Dread is when you're confronted with the sheer openness of your own freedom. When you realize that you have to choose how to live, and there is no external authority that can make that choice for you, you might experience this feeling of dread. When you understand that you are responsible for defining yourself and that you can't just follow a script that somebody else wrote, you experience dread. When you confront the fact that you could be anyone and you have to decide who you're going to be, you're going to have some dread. And this is the dread of possibility. Most people spend their whole lives trying to escape the dread. They want someone to tell them how to live. Parents, teachers, society, religious authorities. Anyone who can take away the burden of having to genuinely choose. But that is what Kierkegaard would call bad faith. It's lying to yourself about your own freedom, pretending that you are just following orders or tradition or logic when actually you're making a choice to follow those things. You can choose to adopt your society's values, and that's fine, but it's still a choice. You are responsible for making it, and you can choose to follow a religious tradition, also fine, but you're still responsible for that choice. You can't pretend that you're just doing what you're told when you're the one that has to accept that authority. This is what existential responsibility means. You're responsible, not just for your actions, but for the framework that you use to decide how to act. You choose that framework, and you keep choosing it every day by not choosing differently. Let's go back to Abraham. He chose to obey God's command. He could have chose differently and said no, maybe ran away. He could have pretended that he didn't hear God correctly, but he didn't. He made a choice, and he cannot escape responsibility for that choice by saying, God told me to do it. He's still the one that chose to obey, and he's the one who interpreted that as God's voice. He is the one who decided that it was worth following. And if Isaac had been sacrificed, that choice was still on him. Now, this is radically different from how we usually think about responsibility. We think we're only responsible for things that we directly control. But Kierkegaard is saying that you're responsible for everything about how you exist, including which authorities you accept and which values you adopt, which framework you use for making decisions. Because you can't outsource this. You can't say, well, I'm just being rational, so it's not really my choice. Because choosing to be rational is a choice. You can't say that you're following your own tradition, because choosing to follow tradition is a choice. You can't say, I'm just doing what feels right, because choosing your feelings is also a choice. Kind of get what I'm saying here? All the way down, it's choices, and you are responsible for all of them. And this is why Kierkegaard emphasizes anxiety so much. Not necessarily anxiety about outcomes, but about the fundamental structure of human existence. You are thrown into a situation where you have to choose yourself into being, and you have to do it without complete justification. And you can't wait until you have enough information. You don't get to live in a holding pattern until you're certain. Because life is always happening, and you're making choices now. Every moment that you delay is itself a choice to delay. And some people respond to this by choosing a little too quickly. They grab onto the first framework that seems to work and they hold on to it tight. They commit without reflection. Now, this avoids one kind of anxiety, but could create an entirely different kind of inauthenticity. You're not really choosing yourself, but escaping the dread of having to choose. And other people respond by never choosing at all. They keep all of their options open and stay flexible, and avoid committing to anything that might turn out to be wrong. But this is also inauthentic. You're not defining yourself, you're just letting yourself be defined by circumstances. So the authentic response is somewhere between these. You have to choose and commit, but you have to do it while fully acknowledging that you are making somewhat of a leap, that you might not have complete justification, and you're taking a responsibility for something uncertain. This means living with the kind of productive anxiety. The anxiety that keeps you honest but doesn't paralyze you. And it reminds you that you are always choosing and always responsible. Now, here is a practical example. Imagine you're in a career that's reasonably successful, but maybe not deeply fulfilling. Now, you could stay because it's safe and rational, or you could leave because you want something more meaningful. Either way, you're making a choice about what matters to you. If you stay, you're choosing security over meaning. And if you leave, you're choosing meaning over security. Neither choice can be fully justified in advance, because you won't know until years later whether you made the right call. The inauthentic response is to pretend that you're not choosing, to say that circumstances forced you to say, or that you had no choice but to pursue your passion. But that is a lie, and you are still responsible for that choice, even if you try to use other frameworks to justify it. The authentic response is to choose while acknowledging your choosing, to commit to staying or going, while accepting that you cannot be certain it's right, to take responsibility for defining what matters to you, even though you can't prove that's what should matter. And this applies to every life decision you make. Who you marry, where you'll live, what you believe, how you value, and even how you spend your time on a daily basis. All of it requires choosing without being completely certain, and all of it makes you responsible. And you might get it wrong. That's part of what makes it terrifying. You could commit to something and later realize it was a huge mistake. And you might leap and find that there's nothing to catch on to. But the point is, getting it wrong is still better than never choosing at all. Because at least you actually lived and you took responsibility. You defined yourself through genuine commitment. The worst possible outcome is spending your whole life avoiding the leap, pretending that you are not a free and responsible agent of your own being, pretending that someone or something else can tell you how to live. Because then you get to the end and you realize that you never actually became anyone. You just played roles that other people wrote for you and followed scripts without ever asking if they were your scripts. You drifted through possibilities without committing to one. And this is what Kierkegaard means when he talks about despair. It's despair in the existential sense. The despair of never becoming yourself and of living inauthentically, avoiding your own freedom. Now, you can be successful by external standards and still be in despair. You can have all the aesthetic pleasures and still be in despair. And you can even follow all of the ethical principles and be in despair. Because none of that is the same as actually choosing yourself into existence. So, where does that leave us? It means that you have to accept that you are radically free and responsible. You can't escape either one. And you can't outsource the decision about how to live. You have to leap. You have to commit and take responsibility for defining yourself through your choices. And you have to do all of this while acknowledging the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with it. And this is what Kierkegaard started, this framework for thinking about human existence. And it pretty much influenced every existentialist thinker who came after him. Satir, Camus, Heidegger, they all grappled with these same questions about freedom and responsibility and authenticity. The third way, the life of faith in Kierkegaard's philosophical sense, requires accepting that you are free. Accepting that you have to commit without certainty, and accepting the anxiety that comes with all of it. And then doing it anyway. Living authentically, even though it's terrifying. And that's not exactly comforting. But Kierkegaard isn't offering you a system that makes life easy. He's confronting you with the structure of existence itself. And you can't escape it any more than the rest of us can. But at least now you know what you're dealing with. And you can stop pretending that someone else has to tell you how to live. Make the genuine choices instead of just following scripts. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And if you enjoyed the structure this week and you want this to be the structure moving forward, let me know in the comments. But as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.